Thank you, and thank you for coming this morning. Thanks for the Creative Morning team for having me. And the theme is urbanism, and since I'm working at the IT park of the university, it's going to be sort of paired with IT. So that's my theme, the urban interface. But first, a bit of literature. Does anybody recognize this quote? I can say it's a book from 1948 that recently, here in June, with the NSA scandal unrolling, skyrocketed in sales. So any suggestions? 1984. Yeah, it's a classic, George Orwell's 1984, a classic in the discussion of surveillance. It's known for depicting a totalitarian society with surveillance in its backbone. So the basic mechanism of the plot is a description of how surveillance disciplines the individuals, as described in this quote. And this disciplining is, in other words, a sort of sensorial consciousness, a consciousness of sensation and its way of functioning and being mediated. So you can sort of see how you could say that the surveillance becomes a part of his sensing, a part of his conscience, and that's what's described. And of course, currently, because of this PRISM and NSA history, and we've heard so much of this general surveillance system, that it includes major IT companies such as Google, Skype, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple. And the other day I actually read an editorial by the chief editor of the British newspaper The Guardian, which is one of the papers that have sort of led the investigation of the Snowden files, Edward Snowden files. And he argued that after this surveillance, it is becoming increasingly difficult to use the internet for critical journalism and communication. And he said that soon we will be back to pen and paper. I think that's a quite paradigmatic saying. But hey, let's see if I can start this one. Apple already saved us, of course. This is an advertisement from 1984. Where Apple introduced the Macintosh, and at the end there's a deep, trustworthy voice that says on January, or maybe I should try to emulate it, on January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce the Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. And what happened? Well, they presented the Macintosh, which was sort of the first commercial version of the graphical user interface with a Mac OS that we still know, where they adapted this graphical user interface from the Xerox PARC machines, and it was later taken up by Microsoft in Windows and became the ruling standards for PCs ever since. So what happens here is, of course, that sort of the big history is that the computer was developed within military surveillance and intelligence, and as an intelligence technology. For instance, with the SAGE project in the 1960s, which was sort of a automatic surveillance technology, surveying the airspace, and this is a crucial moment, but of course there are more to this history. It was reinterpreted as a liberating technology, and empowering technologies that sort of could help individuals to open up their creative potential. And Apple has of course been one of the leading companies in this strategy, but it also includes, of course, a lot of research and development, and some of it by Californian hippies and others. But we could say with this PRISM and NSA scandal, the wheel seems to have turned back, and we are sort of back to military intelligence. And as this picture shows, they don't tolerate hippies anymore. So consequently, with the interface, we're dealing with a coin with two sides, and with the computer. Of course, the interface is an integral part of the computer. So on the one side, we have new cultural and expressive possibilities of the computer as a technology of empowerment and of personal expression, if not liberation. On the other side, we have surveillance, intelligence, and the related disciplining effects that necessarily follow. So you could say the flip side of interactivity and the interface is surveillance, monitoring, data collection. Now the city, because of course where we are at right now, this interface increasingly pervades the urban space, our navigation in it, the way we see, understand and develop the urban. To sort of quickly outline it, you could say that the interface history can be divided into a series of phases, from control panels and command line interfaces. In the 60s and the 70s, the Macintosh evolved, and 1984 marks the stage where the graphical interface came out of the labs and became an integral part of the personal computer. With the web, and especially Web 2, the interface becomes social, and we are now at a threshold, or perhaps entering, what we could call the urban interface, what I've called the urban interface here, where urban space and interaction in the city becomes increasingly mediated by mobile, embedded, ubiquitous interfaces. So we are getting used to laptops, tablets, smartphones with cameras, media players, GPS devices, etc. And these mobile devices are connected with the social interface using Web 2 technologies and platforms, which allow the user access to location-specific information, but also, of course, allow advertisers and software companies like Apple and Google to access to detailed monitoring of user behavior and location. A few years back, actually in 2008, I was part of a group where we did a study. It was in Lund in Sweden. It could just as well have been in Aarhus. Lund is a bit smaller, but it's also a sort of a university town. It could just as well have been here. And what we found there, we were sort of looking for digital technologies in the urban space. And what we found was basically that these two kinds of digital space, a sort of what you could call a login space, spaces where you sort of have to enter your code to enter. And these are two examples. And also, of course, a sort of mobile computing space, people sitting with their laptops. And 2008, it wasn't before the iPhone, but it was before it was sort of widely spread, at least in Scandinavia. I'd say, without having done the full study, that after this, we also have things like, of course, smartphones and iPhones, much more prevalent than at that time. But they are also, of course, as you know, even though they're fantastic, they are a fantastic new interface. They are currently not totally open technologies, but are mainly sort of organized around centralized services. For instance, we have the App Store that can ban things, so you can't distribute your stuff through it, which happened to Peter Øvig Knudsen, as we saw before. So all distribution, at least to the iOS platforms, the iPhones and iPads, has to go through this. And as we also know, the NSA scandal, there's a heavy monitoring following these platforms. So you could say they monopolize our urban interfaces. They're sort of commercial, centralized social platforms. Everything is sort of going through a few very centralized platforms. So it's you could say, you know, a bit quickly, of course, that this urban interface, at least this part of it, is homogenized and controlled from Silicon Valley, whether it's from Google or Apple headquarters. And the question is, of course, whether we as citizens of Aarhus and of the world can be happy with this. This is, of course, a rhetorical question. My point here, and maybe that's where we can leave it up for discussion, is that we won't get rid of the surveillance. It's part of the interface, and it's part of interface culture. And we actually also, to some degree, willingly take part of it when we post on Facebook, etc. But what can we do then? Well, my point would be that we need to get as much of the data out in the open so that we, and not only Google and Apple, can use it to build our cities, societies, cultures, communities, and businesses. If not, we are privatizing our public space and can hope at nothing more than becoming subcontractors to Google and Apple. And also we need to get the monitoring and surveillance out in the open in order for us to know we're getting watched and when we're getting watched and how we're getting watched. Because that's, if we look at an urban square, it's of course designed in a way that people go out into an urban square and they know they are getting watched, and you go out there to show yourself up and enter into a community, meet people. So being public, being allowed, being seen is not bad per se, but so I'm not sort of arguing for privacy all over. But we should know when we are being watched and how we are being watched, so that we can put on our public face. There's been a bunch of research into this, and of course also into stuff like Facebook, etc. That people do know and have a public face also, even on Facebook. So this openness, of course, includes the data that we produce on our smartphones when browsing, clicking, reading, writing, listening, talking, photographing, and moving around. The only way to counter the hegemony of surveillance is actually by transparency. And I think this is the most, actually, and I want to stop it there, this is the most important battle of the current and future city. It has already started, and I'm actually afraid we are behind already. But things are happening also in Aarhus. There are initiatives about making data open, using open data to make innovation, both for companies and for culture. So please participate. Please become part of this. Thank you. I would say initiatives like this could be an endeavor to do it. I'm also, of course, sort of inspired by what has happened the recent months. But I think we might see signs that we are at a turn. Not that we didn't kind of knew that this was happening before, but now we know for sure. And I would be surprised if this doesn't mark a turn where you start to question these companies and these services. That I have an iPhone as well, and I'm not saying, but still, stories like the story that was the other day that where a young guy couldn't enter the US because he'd taken over a telephone number. Ordinary people will get hit. Not you don't have to be a terrorist to be or potential terrorists to be a bit scared of this, so I think, and I hope this marks a turn where we will start to question these models and start to develop alternatives. And so, yeah, this is an idea. I think also, you know, sort of the more business perspective that if we want to develop alternatives to the structures and the technologies, the platforms we see from Silicon Valley, we have to do something completely different. But of course, we also make smartphone apps, and etc. You know, there are many ways to deal with this, of course. Yeah, that's another good point actually. That you know, what are we doing when we are going around staring at this thing? We sort of transporting our personal perspective on a public space. Like, you know, I can see are my friends in the area, and you know, where did my friends go? You know, which cafe did they go to, and stuff like that. So it becomes a part of. It becomes also a very sort of personalized perspective to public space, and I think the answer is other scales of interfaces also, like we've been involved also in doing sort of media architecture, where you get another scale that's visible on another scale. And well, I don't know all the answers, but I think also, you know, to try to experiment to get it out of this personalized perspective because, you know, the PC is, after all, it's called the personal computer, and you could argue that a smartphone is an even more personalized interface. Even though, of course, you know, you can sort of see your friends and there's a public perspective, it's still a personal interface to public space, and we probably need other kinds of interfaces, yeah, and who's going to pay for that? Maybe the city, maybe some of the enterprises, maybe cultural money. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's a very good point. Also, in the sense that, yeah, as I say, we won't get rid of it. It's part of the technology, and it's part of our culture and, you know, our community. That, you know, it's the current version of window mirrors or something, right? But for instance, if you've got an iPhone or an Android, you don't necessarily know how you're being monitored. You know, you only know it if you hack it, or you know, if you read stuff on the internet. So you can't get access to the machine in that sense. It's locked down, and I see that as one of the problems that actually you know, I want to argue for getting more of the surveillance out in the open and opening the data. You know, and of course you have all questions of privacy. It's not an easy solution, but I think that's the only way. It's a bit like this Ai Weiwei, his reaction when he got heavily monitored was actually to put up more surveillance technology and put it and lay it all openly out on the internet, and sort of saying, well, you're surveying me, but I'm, you know, putting up even more to sort of further transparency, and actually hitting, sort of criticizing the Chinese government by that, saying, well, you know, I'm transparent, you know, but your surveillance is not transparent. But of course, it's a very complicated discussion, and I think, you know, there are a lot of technical details and you know, business models that needs to involve, etc. But another aspect is, of course, that, you know, a city like Aarhus or any city has a lot of data, and maybe some of this data is useful to also, you know, understand the city in a new way. So that's what is happening, of course, with this open data initiative, to try to put more data out in the open, also to experiment, you know, what can we use it for? Because of course data is unreadable as it in itself, you know. We need to develop software, apps, interfaces for it in order for it to be, you know, it's not that we lack data in our everyday life. In a way, we've got too much data. And of course, this layer of data is also, you know, you could say a new political sphere. It's a new public sphere. It's something that needs to be debated, something that we need to discuss, you know, when we have a new part of the city developing like we currently have, or we need to discuss, you know, I don't know, property prices, traffic routes, everything. And so there are some possibilities actually for bringing more data into the picture and having different discussions as well with such technologies. But I actually heard also, you know, somebody saying, I can't remember where I read that, somewhere on the web, that they thought the next business opportunity was privacy, private platforms, because, you know, maybe we are getting to a point where we're tired of this. You can get anything for free as long as we as long as we monitor your data. Maybe we've sort of are getting close to a limit for this. We'll see.
It's getting close to now. Thank you, Søren.
Thank you for coming.